All right. Okay, we're going to get started because we have a really full agenda and we do have a quorum, so we can get going here. Who is going to act as our clerk? Okay. I'll say welcome in the pledge, and then we'll move on. And we're all discombobulated. It's an unusual evening. Good evening. Welcome to the June 14th Village Board work session. We'll begin with a special session. This meeting is called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we need to do a roll call?
I'll do a brief roll call.
Thank you, sir.
Trustee Codman. Trustee Casada. Present. And Mayor Geary.
Present. Is perhaps the mic on the podium on? No? All right. All right, we'll give it a try. It's all ambient sound in the room, so that's why we're trying to really speak up for Tom. I don't even need to be speaking right now. This is all you, Stuart.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a resolution tonight, resolution authorizing the interim village manager to sign an agreement with the town of Ossining to extend until June 30, 2018. The intermunicipal agreement dated January 1, 2002 between the village of Ossining and the town of Ossining for the village of Ossining to supply the unincorporated area of the town of Ossining with water. Is there any member of the public who wishes to address the board on this resolution? Seeing no one, I will read the resolution to the board. Whereas the village of Ossining and the town of Ossining entered into an agreement effective January 1, 2002 for the village of Ossining to supply the unincorporated area of the town of Ossining with water. And whereas pursuant to the aforementioned agreement, the village of Ossining is compensated by the consumers in the unincorporated area of the town of Ossining at a rate that is 50% greater than the rate charged by the village of Ossining to consumers within its limits, similarly situated and using the same amount of water for the same purposes. And whereas the aforementioned agreement had a term of 15 years commencing on January 1, 2002, and whereas the village of Ossining and the town of Ossining want to extend the agreement until June 30, 2018 under the same terms as the January 1, 2002 agreement. Now therefore be it resolved that the interim village manager is authorized to sign an agreement extending until June 30, 2018 the intermunicipal agreement dated January 1, 2002 between the village of Ossining and the town of Ossining for the village of Ossining to supply the unincorporated area of the town with water under the terms of the January 1, 2002 agreement, such agreement subject to review by the village's corporation council. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
On the board, it does seem like there warrants some brief discussion of this.
Thank you, Mayor. It's really just a housekeeping item that's going to allow us to submit for this grant. Superintendent Teese was here at an earlier work session or legislative session, maybe, describing the application process that's being undertaken by our consultant right now, Hazen and Sawyer, as well as Manganaro Engineers. This is for a water funded capital improvement project on 2 water mains in the town. And because they exist in the town and it's being funded out of our water fund, the administrator of the grant, which is the Environmental Facilities Corporation, is requesting documentation of the IMA that states the same. So that's what this is doing by nature of extending the IMA past its expiration.
And to be clear, we're just maintaining the status quo as far as the agreement between the village and the town.
Correct.
Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I entertain a motion now to adjourn the special meeting to go into work session.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All right, and what an exciting work session it is. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. As we discussed, Mayor, our first presenter tonight is Mr. Jerry Fiella, and I believe you wanted to expand on the introduction to the program yourself. So, Mayor?
Oh, little discombobulated tonight, as I said. Jerry, if you could give us just a few minutes. We usually open up with some remarks from the village board. The special session sort of confused me, but thank you, Deputy Mayor, for reminding me. And since you reminded me, why don't you kick us off?
Sure. Maybe we'll just see if we work out the audio here. There have been some recent events here in the village with regards to federal authorities and immigration. Some of this is very concerning to me for a number of different reasons. In particular, my concern really is about public safety and making sure that there are proper and clear communications between federal agents of any kind and the village of Ossining. It's my understanding that immigration enforcement has a policy that informs local police enforcement of their presence within the municipality. And I think it's very important that that communication be clear and very specific, not just in a general way, but in a very specific way. The recent events that took place last week, our village police department was not told all the information it needed to know about the whereabouts of holstered federal agents that were not fully uniformed. And in this type of a situation, it creates a real public safety hazard, not only for our citizens, but for our police, but for federal enforcement themselves. And I would hope that in the future, that federal enforcement officials would give us the courtesy to keep us clearly informed and exactly informed about their whereabouts within our municipality. I cannot say how troubled I am by the recent statement, the public statement of an immigration press person who indicated that they had told us that their presence was here. Yes, they did, but it was non-specific to the area of the recent arrest of the young man, the high school student. And this is quite troubling to me. This is not sustainable. It creates distrust. And as I said before, everybody's safety is most important to village enforcement, to village police, and to the trustees, and obviously everybody who lives here. So I implore federal authorities to be specific and tell us where you're going to be for your own safety, for our police's safety, and for all our citizens' safety. Thank you very much.
I'll just update folks on along those lines. Earlier this week, I had a meeting with the chief of police and Ray Sanchez from the school district and Dana Levenberg from the town and Stuart and Trustee Bazemore. And it was the first of what is going to be another conversation reaching out to various entities in our community who are all touched by this particular incident and what it means for our community, particularly reaching out to the immigrant community to clearly make sure that everybody understands what is the role of local police and law enforcement agencies when we're talking about federal agencies versus local agencies and the very big difference that we have there, the importance of folks in our community knowing that we want them to come to the local police department for help. That's what the local police department is here for, is to protect all of us in Ossining. And I will say this was quite a surprising and disconcerting, disturbing incident for many of us. In the past, the visits from federal immigration authorities that we've been aware of were targeting folks that were believed to be dangerous. And this feels very different. And as I said, it's really important to us on a local level that folks understand how to distinguish between local law enforcement and the work that's being done by federal agencies so that they know that the local law enforcement is here to protect all of us. Please report crimes if you become aware of them, and we need your help if we can help us with investigations. All of that is important for the safety of the whole community. And as far as actions that we can take as American citizens, that really is speaking to our federal representatives, and many people have seen that Representative Nita Lowey has put out her statement, and she also reached out to the village in the wake of the detainment, and we've also heard from Chuck Schumer's office, and those are folks who are actually in a position to hear your concerns if you want to talk about federal immigration policies. If you want to talk about local law enforcement policies, I know that the chief is continuing to reach out to all of us in the community. And sort of a fun way to do it tomorrow night, you can play kickball with a cop, which is a much lighter way to interact with law enforcement than what we've been talking about recently. Our local law enforcement certainly has made a lot of efforts to do community outreach, to have community policing as a model, and particularly has increased their outreach to the immigrant community in recent months. And this incident makes it even tougher to build those strong relations. So we are continuing to work on that, and I look forward to our next meeting, which I believe is tomorrow morning, correct, Mr. Dinsmore? Okay. With that, I think we're ready to get on with the agenda. Does anybody else want to comment on this? Oh, please.
I just want to let everybody know, I'm just going to read it off. Let's see here. So I'm wearing two hats. I'm also involved with the Richard Wishney Park. And also just want to let people know that I'm trying to get the right time. This Friday, Superintendent Ray Sanchez will be with the folks from the Richard Wishney Park at the Richard Wishney Park to kick off the Summer Story Walk. It'll start at the park. There's going to be reading for the kids, for those of you who have kids that want to bring them, especially look at the weather, it's supposed to be great. It is Friday at 4 p.m. So I consider this the official kickoff of not only improving the education, but really getting the community involved with the kids. So please join us Friday at 4 o'clock, Richard Wishney Park.
I'm glad you brought that up, because now that we've transitioned to something lighter and funner and educationally minded, Ray Sanchez, I believe, will then be on his way to Lewis Enkle Park, because at 5:30 is the Ossining Basics party. I don't know if it's the summer kickoff or so Ossining Basics is the community-wide effort to encourage early learning and early reading and communicating with families from birth until they get to preschool. And so there'll be lots of fun games and music down at Lewis Enkle Park starting at 5:30. So I guess the story is at Wishney Park, then the party is at the waterfront at Lewis Enkle Park, and then as soon as it gets dark, you can watch Finding Dory, which is being put on by the PBA. So there's lots of family fun all night Friday. So we really better have great weather. Now should I introduce Jerry and get back on track with our agenda? Mr. Fiala, thank you so much for your patience. Thank you for joining us this evening, and I'll just give a 2-second update that it's a real pleasure to work on the Sing Sing Museum project, and as mayor I get to be an ex officio member, and there's some really terrific folks who have joined the board, and I imagine you'll be giving us a bit of an update, Jerry, that the board is official now. It's been operating unofficially as a board, and now it's really moved into a new level of official nonprofit boardness, and that makes Jerry's role a little different. So there have been a lot of developments with the project, and not least of which is additional grant money, which is helping in a variety of ways in different phases. And what we're going to learn about tonight is a particular grant that the village is would probably be the best lead agent for. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, Madam Mayor, I have some flyers that I would like to pass out to the audience here. Maybe they could take a look at that.
I'll open it up so you can start talking. Just so Jerry can talk.
Thank you very much. Madam Mayor, members of the board, Ms. Hockling, Mr. Fraley, thank you very much for having me here tonight. This is just an exciting project, and every time we turn around, it just gets more exciting. A little over a month ago, I approached the town board with the same request for the SAM grant money. And I went back and I looked at the notes that I used at that presentation, and I was surprised at how much it transpired in that short period of time. I also have 2 copies here of our case for support document, which I'll leave here for you to take a look at, guys, pass them around, just read through them, okay? I'll fill you in where we are with that as well. As you know, in April, we opened up an office on Main Street to have a presence in the village and actually start to really put some structure behind this project. Madam Mayor, as you mentioned, on May 9th, we received from the New York State Board of Regents charter approval to develop and operate the museum. So this new Sing Sing board is now functioning, and we are now in the process of applying for our 501c3 status to make it truly a not-for-profit organization. We issued a press release as a result of the charter announcement, and yesterday we hosted a reporter from the Wall Street Journal who was here, went through the entire project with Mike Capra. She met with Mike Capra, interviewed Mike, interviewed Sean Peter from Hudson Link, interviewed Brent, Dana White, and I think we have a very good understanding of what this project is all about. As you know, the museum board has started to elect officers. We're starting to grow at a very planned pace. We have a nominating committee and a sessions committee that is going to be meeting on Friday. We've got a fundraising committee moving along. So everything is really starting to take shape. A few weeks ago, we held a little pizza night at a local friend's house, a supporter. We had over 75 people attend, and right now our friends list has grown to over 200 people. This weekend at the street fair, we had another 25 people sign up. So now we have we're starting to really develop a nice mailing list to send things out. And as you know, the Chamber of Commerce is actually going to host a lobster fest with the donations going back to this museum project as well, so we're getting that out. We've completed an economic impact assessment for the project, and we have a draft report on the traffic impacts that we're just starting to review now before we circulate. There's a few questions that I've started to look at, and we want to just talk to Burkhurst, Jack and Martin Fish, they're prepared. But the economic impact analysis, I wish I brought a copy along tonight, I'm thinking about it, but it was amazing to see what some of the economic benefits would be in the job creation of this project. And as a matter of fact, some of that was quoted in the letter that we sent in to support the DRA application the town village submitted. The last component that we have right now under our initial $250,000 grant is to look at this downtown visitor center and bring in have a meeting with stakeholders, both locally and regionally, to see how this museum would then start to tie in to the network. There's a good local network here with almost just about a critical mass of things to do and places to go and visit, which would almost bring somebody into Ossining and occupy a full day's time. And then there's also a great regional network that is built upon the National Heritage Area, which Ossining sits pretty much not in the middle of, but in the southern tier of. And you also have to remember that Ossining is also a state heritage area, which is what we will be using the basis for the next CFA grant we're applying for the New York State Parks and Rec as a heritage area grant program. DOCS, the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, have provided us with a draft lease for the powerhouse, which council and myself have been looking at and going through. But there are some issues, and we are, Chuck Lesnick from the governor's office has assisted us excuse me, with the scheduling of a meeting that's tentatively set for Monday, 19th, to go over all these issues. That meeting will take place with the Dormitory Authority, which is a funding source for us, Empire State Development, and the Department of Corrections. The village will be present, St. Miguel will be present. The idea is to make sure that everything gets sorted out.
Just before you go on, because there's been some acronyms and some folks that you've identified that perhaps I'm not even sure everybody at the table knows, but certainly folks at home. You mentioned some of the people that are involved, and Mike Capra is the superintendent at the Sing Sing prison, and we're very pleased that he's a helpful partner in this process. And when you say DOCS, you're talking about the Department of Corrections.
Department of Corrections and Community Supervision, yes.
Right,
Yeah,
which is
that is the organization that runs the prison.
right, and also a really important partner, especially because we are looking to have access even within the security walls to the original cell block, and that was a really big step in the relationship between the museum project and the Department of Supervision. And you also just mentioned the name Brett Glass, which it's always good for folks to realize that we've got his level of expertise helping with this process. He's director emeritus from one of the Smithsonian's, and so he's really a heavy hitter in the museum world and very helpful.
He's Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. And he's been our project advisor for the last year and a half. And he brings with him a wealth of knowledge, a tremendous network in the museum world across the entire country, and actually some places overseas as well. So this has been a really great project. And I think we've got a lot of the right players in place to make this happen. One of the issues that we've run into, which before we get into the immediate issue with the SAM grant, has been that the Dormitory Authority, which is one of the granting agencies, is concerned that being the Historic Hudson River Towns as the grant recipient, doesn't have adequate site control of the facility. Now, the village has received a letter from the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision that says when the time is appropriate, we will transfer site control of the powerhouse to the village. And the village has a letter that they submitted to HHRT indicating that they would transfer site control to HHRT or whatever board is charged with the operation and maintenance of the museum. The Department of Corrections doesn't feel that's adequate. They want to actually see a lease or a deed to the powerhouse. When I spoke to docs, they sent us down a sample deed. Council and I, Stuart, Council and I have been going through it, but we're concerned because I don't want to see docs want to issue the lease to the village, and then docs say, yeah, but the grant goes to HHRT. We want to make sure that all the dots are connected properly, the T's are crossed, so that the funding gets opened back up. Right now, we're at a stalemate. Not insurmountable, but we just have to put all the people in the room and not let anybody walk out of the room saying, well, we have to get back to it. No, that's not an adequate answer. We have to have the answer. So that's the purpose of the meeting. We have it tentatively scheduled for Monday. Stuart and I have been talking about it. We'll have all the documentation present and we'll be able to see where we go. Hopefully by Monday afternoon, we'll come back with a smile on our face. No checks, but a smile on our face. What I provided to the board tonight was a memo dated June 8th, and there's some backup documentation. Right now, we have committed from the Dormitory Authority $1 million grant under the CCAP program, and another $100,000 under the EDAP, that's Economic Development Assistance Program. Sandy Gilliff got us the first $1 million, and David Carlucci was able to get us the $100,000. Both grants fall into that same issue of site control, so both of them are held. However, the $1 million grant is tied into our first $250,000 grant from Empire State Development. We have to have a contract signed to spend $1 million to get the last reimbursement for the $250,000. Now, that's again a little bit of a struggling act that we're in. I said to somebody the other day, I feel like the old guy in Sullivan that has the plate spinner. Remember the plate spinning guy? That's the way I feel sometimes. So that's why we want to start to move this along. Well, we have the $1 million. The $100,000 grant from the Dormitory Authority is to pay historic preservation architects, and their work is about halfway done. We paid them some, but we're not going to move anything forward until we clear up the site control issue. And in addition to that, we just received in December 2016 another $500,000 grant from Empire State Development. That again can be used for capital improvements, but we have to match that with $2 million, which is the immediate local match that the museum board is working on, how to fund that. That's the emphasis that we're doing with the case for support and all of the activity. The $2 million that we raise, if you look at one of the charts that I just provided you, the $2 million that you raise, I want to go back and make sure that I state it correctly. $1.375 million can be used for capital. $625,000 can be used for planning. Okay. And then on top of that, we have this issue of the SAM grant, which is $1 million that only another state municipality can enter into. The not-for-profit is not eligible. So the village or the town have to make that application. When we total all of this up, we have the initial $1 million from DASNY. We have the $500,000 from ESD. We have the $1.375 that we have to raise this next million. Brings us over to $3.8 million. Now we've gone back to Jan Hyper Corning and we said, if we have this funding in total, what would we be able to do? And in here you'll see charts that they prepared and provided us. That basically starts to outline a work program, which starts to really get exciting. Because here, what we start to do is we start to see the plywood taken off the buildings, new windows put in, the steel superstructure inside the building cleaned up, painted, anything that's bad removed, the stairway fixed, and the buildings start to become occupiable, which we think is an amazing feat. Okay, because if we can get that first floor, back area of the powerhouse, the first floor where that 7-story tower is, occupiable, then we have the ability to bring in potential funders, okay, really start to showcase the facility, using the money that we have for museum design, the $625, plus the $125, there's another $125,000 that Sandy was able to get us. We're talking $750,000. That money for the design, we can start to have some exhibitry in this location. And we can actually start to do some programming on criminal justice and social justice, which is again an integral part of the museum's purpose. We think that then becomes the mechanism for the major capital funding program to really fund the actual construction. Because the construction of the museum is not inexpensive, it is expensive. But because part of this is getting access to the 1825 cell block, building a secure corridor, going through security, issues. It's not something that Docs has said no to. Docs has said, we understand the need to get into the original 1825 cell block, to show us how you intend to do it. And Mike Capra has said, we will work with you to see if we can make this happen. So that's very exciting and very promising for us. But the issue right now is if we can get the SAM grant money, or if one of the jurisdictions is willing to make the application, that gives us a total of $3.8 million in capital to work with once we raise that $1.75. And that really starts us on the way of getting the building cleaned up. Now, in addition to that, I want to let you know 2 other things. The Department of Corrections has been very cooperative with us. As a matter of fact, Mike Capra had mentioned to me, Mike Capra had gotten the work detail into the 1825 cell block to start to clean out all of the overgrowth. They got a dumpster there that really, they started to clean that out completely. And he said they're working on a detail right now to clean out the debris in the back half of that powerhouse. So those are all very positive signs and very positive contributions. And also, Empire State Development has said that if we have in-kind services towards that $1.3 million that we have to raise for capital, we can count the in-kind services as well. So it's all spelled out in the memo that I gave you, and it ties into the division of work that Jan High prepared. It looks like this chart here, and then you see all of the funding laid out in the chart that I provided and prepared. Last, I want to mention the board of directors. It's a great assembly of people with tremendous talent. That page for support document that you see there was written by Dana White, edited by Brent Glass, and assembled and put together by Rochelle Udell, who is a former employee or an officer of Condé Nast. We've got, it's been tremendous. We had to pay for that and produce it ourselves, it would have been a lot of money. It was donated, okay, for the talents of the people. Sean Peak has been an amazing resource for us as far as funding in various places. With Bill Osborne, who's on the board of the Osborne Association, whose great grandfather was Thomas Mott Osborne, who was the superintendent of this prison, has been instrumental in helping us and starting to work with the Sessions Committee. I mean, it's a great assembly of people. And every time we talk about this program at the fair on Saturday, I couldn't keep these on the table. They were just moving as quickly as you can imagine. And there was not one negative comment about the project. People thought the storyline was amazing. They thought what's taking place there with Hudson Lake Rehabilitation of the Arts. And the way this prison was founded and built is just a story that really should be told. As a matter of fact, I just met a couple from Arizona that were up here tonight in your visitor center looking at facilities in real life. So I just think it would be a great asset to the village. I think it would be a great asset to the region. I think it's a story that really needs to be told. And any opportunity we have to fund earlier is the board to consider because we need to do that. Time is right. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. I know that you had shared the material with us preliminarily last week, at least, earlier this month. Did staff have a chance to look at it? I know we've done similar grants in the past. I see Tom. Yeah, there's Tom. Are there any concerns for the board to be aware of as far as what the village's role will be as the lead agent? It sounds like Sing Sing Prison Museum is really going to do a, Jerry does a great job at putting applications. You want to come up, Tom?
I don't want to speak for Tom, but I would say Tom has been instrumental also in keeping our accounting straight for us.
Yes.
And Tom and I are both co-signers on the account. I pay for everything, so we go through each bill meticulously. Tom keeps the record. As a matter of fact, he was instrumental in getting all of the documentation together that we had to submit for our reimbursement, because these are all reimbursement grants, which is what is important to understand.
So I guess the ask for us tonight is the board willing to act as the lead agent for the grant, because it makes more sense for the village to do it than for the town. And it sounds like this would be an extension of the relationship that we already have with the Sing Sing Prison Museum. Obviously, Tom's already involved in facilitating various funds for the museum. Do board members have any questions for Jerry or the staff?
I'll just make a brief comment. Thanks for all your hard work. It's been quite a journey so far, and it looks like you got more of a journey to go on. Good luck at the meeting on Monday. Herding the cats, as it were. But I would certainly be in support of being the lead agency for any type of funding if you need us to be the facilitator of this project, the opportunity for economic development and education, and really be, we have great history here, and the prison is a huge part of the history of the village of Ossining and Sing Sing itself. So I fully support any way we can move the process forward.
Hey Jerry, thanks. Not so much a question, but just going forward in the presentations. If you're going to be becoming a 501c, you're fine?
Yes.
So I think that changes the tone and a number of issues between municipalities and not-for-profits, even in how our staff is involved with not-for-profits and grants and a whole bunch. So if we could just get sort of a framing going forward, like if there are any changes we should be aware of, in the plan, because I do think you're going to find some changes occurring in the way things move forward. So I think we should just make sure that we're aware of anything that happens.
That's okay. Make sure that we're available. Again, all the T's crossed and the I's.
Right, it's just one more piece of information.
Up until now, it's been HHRT,
Yes.
which is also a nonprofit, right? Or is it different status? Okay.
Well, just so everybody understands, Historic House of Rivertowns has been in existence for about 21 years and 22 years, and it's basically a not-for-profit consortium of municipalities that we do a lot of tourism promotion, waterfront development issues, and we also work on some environmental matters along the Hudson River. When this opportunity came around, we talked to the village about whether the village wanted to take the lead, and the village back then several years ago said, HHRT, would you mind taking the lead? And that board was very supportive of it, and we did. Our goal right now is to create the museum board, get that 501c3 status, and then move the project to that board's village. That's the goal. And then HHRP, it's done its job to see this program.
Terrific. Are there further questions or comments?
Thank you. Jerry, it's always good to see you. Why it's taking you so long to have this complete? I just don't get it. But I will definitely in favor of this project. I think it's it'll be an asset for our community, not just for Austin, but for our whole region here in New York, and Hudson River definitely. So whatever, I think I don't want to speak for myself, but whatever I can do to help, and I think some of the board members are in favor of going forward with this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Please.
Just follow up on the mayor's earlier comments about acronyms being thrown around. I don't know if anybody talked about DASNY or SAM grants, but they were referenced in the presentation. State and Municipal Facilities Program grant, that's the acronym for SAM. And DASNY is the administrator of those monies, the Dormitory Authority of the State of New York. Those are grants, as Tom was asked earlier, that we have to make at least 5 to 10 applications for those type grants as the agent over the last few years. So we're familiar with it and look forward to helping Jerry and his team facilitate that.
All right, so I think you have obvious consensus among the board that we're excited to be able to support it this way, and we assume that something will come forward for us to review at the appropriate time for, if we need to pass a resolution to formally support the grant application, Stuart.
We can arrange to put that on even for the next meeting.
Okay.
Just resolve it, but we will do that, sure.
And I believe the form is just a one-page outline that just goes through the Assembly Dean's office.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yes, it's not.
Considering what we've been doing for the last couple of days, right? Okay, great. And I'll just let folks know that you touched on it briefly, but the mission of this is has more than one dimension. Part of it is the history of Sing Sing, and also, which is so integral to the history of Ossining, but also it's going to be a center for justice, and that's a really compelling part of the mission of it that I know will has brought people into the project that are particularly interested in seeing how this can be a centerpiece for academic thought and activism on all kinds of social justice and criminal justice. So thank you for taking the lead on this really fascinating and exciting project for Ossining and the region, but really for folks in Ossining. So we're excited for what it does for us here locally.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
Your staff's assistance.
Yes, they're terrific. All right, speaking of our staff, Paul.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, Mayor. Our next item on the agenda this evening is a presentation and an update on the New Village website being worked on behind the scenes by Ms. Jamie Hoffman from the manager's office. She's here with the consultant tonight from Virtual Town Hall, where they're going to talk about the status of our new website, which is looking to launch soon. Jamie?
Thank you, Mayor, Board of Trustees, Manager Fraioli. As many of you know, we have been reviewing the website here and talking about revamping it. And we've done a lot of research into what it is that we need here in Ossining, what elements we have, and what we used to have and what we can have, and how we can make it navigable for the people of Ossining. I spent some time researching some local websites as far as other villages and towns in the area, as well as other government award-winning websites throughout the country. And a lot of things that we have found are that there are elements that are key to making our site user-friendly for our community. To do this, it needs to be consistent and concise, so that all pages are structured in a way that everyone can find what they're looking for in the simplest of ways. The site should be accessible from all desktops and mobile devices on all platforms, and clickable in a way that makes sense, and seamlessly transition from page to page. You'll see many of these elements in this new website design that we'll be presenting to you today. What I'm going to do now is show you the design and note a few features on here that are new. A lot of times, websites that are 10 plus years old have old features on them, where there are now new features that we can put onto websites that we couldn't do in the past that we want to include. And then what I'll do is I'll take some questions from the board, and then Jonathan Paul from Virtual Town Halls will talk to you about the implementation and the next steps that we're going to do. You all ready to see it? Yeah. By the way. This is our new design. Does everyone have a picture of it? Okay, great. There are a number of new features. It's a little bit hard to see it in this picture on the screen. One of the big ones is the downtown revitalization section. At the top, they're going to be super menus. So when you put your mouse over it, it will drop down and it will show you automatically some different things. Specifically here in the downtown revitalization section, there's going to be new and pertinent information regarding Ossining downtown, any potential transformation initiatives, resources, marketing, etc. Next is the Find It Fast section. This will also be a menu that when you put your mouse over it, it will populate into a super menu. And that is an area that is going to have all of the topics, almost like a site index, that you can get alphabetically. There's also going to be in the section at the top here, a search section. I know that currently the search function on our website is not fantastic. So it will become fantastic, and you'll be able to search it from whatever word it is that you need to find. Next are emergency services. Here, there are going to be links to the fire department, OVAC, and the police department. As many of you know, the police department's website is currently under construction. That website will become something that looks very similar to the look and feel of this site. We've put a piece of it into the budget where they're going to have the same design, but they'll have the bells and whistles that they need as a police department website. Community links. This is a section where we will link to the community as far as library, Ossining schools, Westchester, tourism, anything that has to do with our community that you would be interested in, you'll be able to obtain from here. Last but not least is Spotlight on Ossining. Attending a lot of the meetings that I go to here, community engagement is a really big part of it, and it's something that I figured would be a great idea here. It can help the community engage with the board and the village staff to communicate with the community and so on. So what we'll be able to do here is spotlight people or businesses and so on, and you'll be able to submit anything you want with regards to a person or a place or a business that's new, exciting, or if somebody does something special. And then we'll showcase it in the news section, and we can showcase it in social media, as well as in that area, and if need be, we can put it out to the press. Does anyone have any questions? And then I want you to ask questions about that so that Jonathan can talk to you about the implementation process. Do you have any questions about the design? Yes, Rika?
Is this proportionally correct? So the band on top is taking up half of the above the fold, and then it goes on. The band in the picture is taking up about a third of the real estate.
Talking.
Tom. Is this proportionally the way this is gonna look?
Yeah, it's designed so that when people log on with a tablet or a smartphone, it renders appropriately any mobile device that's connected to the internet. So yeah, that's the way the homepage would look on a desktop or laptop computer. It will look different on the tablet, it will look different on a smartphone.
Well, on an iPhone, that thing's gonna, so the question would be, I'm not having this discussion now, that is proportionally, it's really huge. The picture is taking up a huge part. On an iPhone, it's gonna take a very large part. But my bigger question is, when changes need to be made, you're looking for input. So how are changes made? You said people can just comment in the spotlight, but I'm assuming there's gotta be.
The spotlight is for the community or anyone in the really anyone, that if you want to spotlight a person, let's say that there's, the
Oh,
high school
there we
team
go.
does amazing, the girls team does amazing again, and we want to do a little article about it, we can do it there. That's something that we can frame out, it's just a conception right now, that.
It's nice.
Yeah.
So people will submit something and then the editor, somebody's gonna look at it
And then we'll write a little piece about it, some will be longer than others, depending on what it's about, and if it's something great, then we can put it out to the press and so on, just to generate goodwill in the community.
Oh, I think it looks great. The only thing that you and I talked about is, I get the videos because it'll go into the, and once you forget it, there's a
That's
village
this
YouTube.
year, that's the YouTube
Right.
channel.
It's just that there's gonna be an increase in videos. So this page, I'd just like to understand going forward more about.
That'll link directly to YouTube. The way that our YouTube channel is right now, we have one that's awesome.
I get it, but the real issue is that when you want to put a video up, the only thing that happens when you do it this way is you go to YouTube and a whole bunch of YouTube clips show up. But if something happens and you want to put a video, how does it show up on a homepage? Right.
It's gonna be a direct, like, you click it, YouTube,
Yeah, that was a rhetorical question. I'm going to do this again. When there's a video that we want on the home page, how many of the home pages now have, little sliders that have actual video clips, and you go in so that there's a thumbnail that tells you you're about to see this. I mean, why would you go into a YouTube channel? I mean, you're not, you know what I mean? Do you understand the question?
We can upload it onto YouTube.
Okay.
There are services available,
There are services available that provide that service that you're talking about, but YouTube is a free service, and so that's a village decision, that's not a decision of virtual towns and schools. But if the board wants to pursue contracting with a third party to host the videos, that would be a different issue.
Okay.
But this video will not be on the homepage. That will link to a separate page that will show the video itself with a little triangle in the middle. People will click on that and they'll be able to watch the video.
I'll follow up, sorry. This is going to be a continuous conversation. It looks great.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Can we go back to our seats?
We can, and then, it's up to you, do you want to have Jonathan talk about the
next steps.
next steps, and then you can ask, I just wanted to see if you had questions specifically about this.
No, keep going, okay.
Thank you. So what we're looking for is an approval in writing of the final design. It can be by email. Once we receive that, we will what's called implement the site. So that basically JPEG that you saw on the screen, which is just representation, will turn into an actual working model of the site. The drop downs will work, the links will work, etc. And then it's ready for content development. So the next step after approval is we'll implement the site. That takes about 7 to 10 business days. And then we will assign a project manager at my home office in Boxborough, Massachusetts, who will set up an initial phone meeting with Jamie and whoever else at the village wants to attend that and review the next steps, which are basically meeting with department heads, people who represent the boards and committees, to look at the current site, department by department, board by board, determine which content is relevant and still should be brought over to the new site, and which content is totally outdated and just leave it where it is. That is about a 6 to 8 week process in and of itself. Once the content is developed, oh, by the way, the people involved will be given a URL, which is for internal use only. It won't be available to the public. So they can actually watch the development of the site as it's going, and each department head can say, hey, wait a minute, I sent this in, it's not up there yet. So they're given a mechanism by email in which they can send in new content, whether it's documents, photos, and then it's our responsibility to upload that to the proper. There are also a series of further meetings between the project manager and Jamie and whoever else is involved to keep the project on track.
Once the content has been developed, then I will be here for 2 days of on-site training for the people who are going to get usernames and passwords to edit and update the site. Then about 7 to 10 days after that, we go live. We like to leave a little bit of time there so that people can get used to what's called the content management system, the CMS, and kind of play around with it, make a mistake or two before what they do actually goes live on the new site. So that's what we're looking at. We've got summer coming up, so that might delay things a week or two because of vacations, but once the site is, the design is approved, it should go fairly quickly. Any questions about that?
No, my only comment
You wanna come back and I can turn this in? Just, we're good, yeah, so I can turn this.
my only comment is, instead of having, like Village YouTube, that maybe there be like the icons, like the YouTube icon, the Facebook icon, all those external sites that we may have.
If you take a look at the top of the page, there's a Facebook icon, I believe, There is.
Okay. Okay.
Is that,
Yeah,
we can add an icon for whatever social media, including YouTube, we can add that up there as well.
Yeah, because I would just lump them all together, and maybe you wouldn't even have to have like a, a
We
village.
still have, we'll talk about this later, we have to have, that number of icons there. So come up with a different,
Gotcha.
something else to put there.
There has to be either 3, 4, or 6 of those.
Gotcha.
But the icon itself can be changed. It doesn't have to say Village YouTube, that was decided on for the facility. But Village, if they want that to be labeled, it's up to you.
Whatever we want to put there, we can. Make that a link to meetings and agendas and take it off the side from the quick links, whatever we do.
Village YouTube, the Facebook is a social media connection, the YouTube is not. The YouTube is where they're gonna archive videos, all the videos, so that if you, the latest being first, right? So it's a little different. Facebook, you're gonna go, it's gonna go right into Facebook, into social media. So the purpose is a little different. The YouTube piece, I think, is to be able to do videos. If you put them right into the page, it slows down. It just can't be done. Every video will slow down page turn ratio. So. Yeah, no, it's there. I just need the proportions. I'm actually, we're gonna have to see how this looks on an iPhone, because desktops and all that are all very. You have responsive themes, right? Because what are you using? I think you told me Joomla is what they're using. Okay. But that also, it's all responsive themes, right? So we should see what it looks like on an iPhone, because in Westchester that's a pretty dominant player. So that'll be really great to see.
The only thing I could suggest is that's something implemented yet. If you wanted to look at the new Portchester site on your iPhone, or Dobbs Ferry, or Pelham.
That's helpful.
Yeah, the Portchester site is fairly new, and so is Dobbs Ferry. Pleasantville, Elmsford isn't quite live yet, another week or two.
So estimated rollout date?
Somewhere in the September to October timeframe.
Okay.
Go live. Yeah, we want to be reasonable, especially with the summer coming up, and not over-promise a delivery date when, sometimes circumstances change. So if we can do September, great, but certainly no later than October.
Yeah, I just wanted to, visually, I'm pleased with the design. I probably have the same concern that Rika has with regards to how it's going to render on smaller devices. Certainly the panorama there is beautiful, but I would be concerned about less about the visual beauty of it and more about the functional navigation of the site. You mentioned that there's going to be, I guess, an internal URL that staff would be able to kind of look at, and once content starts to be populated, we'll do some testing to kind of go in and navigate and understand the drop downs and stuff
It'll
like
be a
that.
fully functioning website.
Okay, it'll just be internal.
Correct.
Okay, so
It doesn't have HTTP.
got it.
/
Okay.
in front of it. So
Yeah,
it's
I just think it's important that we spend time, and certainly the trustees would want to get access to that URL, so we'll be able to,
You'll have it
Root
as well
around.
because you have your own DOT icon.
so
There's
we'll
a
be able
section
to,
dedicated to the board.
so we'll be able to see the
Everything.
whole site as it evolves over time, all the new additions of content. We'll be able to basically drop in anytime we want, right? Cool.
So, definitely like the design a lot. I'm gonna kind of disagree with my colleagues in regards to the background. I actually like the size of the picture, but for the format for the cell phones, we can just looking at the one in Portchester now, which is a different format, so it's not gonna be the same look as we see it here, because that's what we some websites, even our own website now, it looks different on a mobile device than actually being in the desktop. So I'm not concerned about that at all. I want to thank Jamie and a lot of the time that she has put in regards to this. So this is looking really cool. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on what Trustee Quesada was just commenting on, which is, Jamie, thanks so much for picking this up because Rika and I had worked with staff in quite a number of meetings to preliminarily discuss how to redo our website, and we got to a certain point, and then we kind of put it on the back shelf, and I'm really glad that you picked it up, Jamie, and I'm really glad that you seem to be working well together to bring us to this point. And I haven't heard any, other than some of the proportion questions and how this will really function, which is something we're going to look into and make sure it all makes sense, and we'll be able to have some offline conversations. But I think the general consensus I'm hearing is that it looks great. We're really excited. Go forth, and we look forward to seeing the URL as it's developing. And as you mentioned, the Board of Trustees, we have our own cute little icon there. And we're going to be one of those departments that has to talk about what's going to be on our page and have some input there. So we'll get to understand firsthand exactly how this process is unfolding. Thank you very much for bringing it to us. Looking forward to it.
Mayor, can I
Yes,
ask one
please.
question? I note that it's powered by Google Translate. For those who don't speak, have you looked at it for what the Spanish version is going to be, that it actually is going to look the same way, because there will be people who will want to look at this just in Spanish?
Yes, I've had a lot of communities in Westchester have the Google Translate on their site, and it works quite well. Even at the city of Peekskill, one of the people was from Bulgaria, and she had me translate it to Bulgarian, and she said even that was pretty accurate. But I just want to caution you that it's only to translate what has been put onto the site through our CMS. It won't translate a PDF that's been uploaded in English. If you want that available in Spanish, then you'll have to upload two versions, an English and a Spanish version.
Yeah, that does bring up one just sort of functional question going forward once this is all set up. So sometime post-September, October, obviously different departments are going to want to update things. Is that something that will be handled internally with Jamie or Craig, or will the department heads actually be able to do it? Okay, you're raising your hand, Paul. Please comment.
I can tell you that most of the documents that we make available to the public, our newsletter, our calendars, our forms for building department, etc., and the applications are the same, are produced in English and Spanish presently. So when we upload, when she reaches out to each department, we'll be able to upload pre-existing documents. I think the nature of Stuart's question was the text itself that goes onto the webpage. So I think we're covered on both ends.
With regards to what the mayor asked, right now, anything for the planning department, they pretty much manage that themselves, but all of the other departments, myself and Craig, that's what we do. Sort of the webmaster first.
The way the CMS is set up, there are different
Permissions and roles. So Jamie will be a site administrator, the village manager will be a site administrator, and they can alter any department or board page, including the home page on the site. Because Drupal is an open source platform, we do provide an unlimited number of usernames and passwords at no extra cost. So it's up to the village how many people get those and what permissions and roles that they're assigned. Normally they would be assigned to a specific department and not be allowed, to edit a department that they're not in. There's also a permission that allows people from say the police department or DPW to upload an urgent alert on the homepage, although they can't do anything else on the homepage. So that's all things that the project manager will go over with Jamie as the content is developed.
I should also tell you that the way that the emergency announcements will be coming through now, as it stands now on our current site, it's a scrolling item, and instead it's going to be I'm not quite sure where, it's going to be stationary, and the reason is because of the ADA compliance. The scrolling, those people that use those devices, it doesn't work on that. So that's why we're going to use this.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jamie. Our next item on the agenda this evening is a follow-up from this past Thursday's noon and 7 p.m. presentation from Mr. Kevin DeMarca and his staff on our housing study that's been going on for the past few months in the village of Ossining. So we welcome them and Lynn McCrum. I'm sorry, Lynn McCrum.
Wow.
That's the last time we've been in this room for a work session. I miss him dearly, I guess.
Oops, I'm sorry. I can move.
Ms. Lynn Brooks Obney is here with Kevin this evening to present the final housing study update report. Kevin, Lynn.
Good evening, board members. Just from the administrative officials tonight, Kevin Dwarka is associate. Tonight, Kevin Dwarka and his associate Robert Joseph will be presenting to the board a policy framework with strategies for housing in the village. In the framework, Mr. Dwarka has delineated both the pros and cons of each policy and essentially created a menu of options that the village must weigh to determine which are most appropriate and right for implementation. As you will recall, we commenced this comprehensive housing study with a 3-step process with public listening and stakeholder sessions on March 6th and an additional one added on April 23rd. Mr. Dwarka and his staff analyzed census data to better understand the demographic and socioeconomic composition of the village. Past plans and studies were reviewed, a cross-section of stakeholders were interviewed, and Mr. Dwarka and his staff toured the village in order to better assess the current housing conditions in the village. Mr. Dwarka appeared before this board on March 22nd and presented a draft existing conditions assessment. Once the data was analyzed, the consultant and his team looked at identifying and determining the village's housing needs. All of this data helped inform the final step, which is the definition of a policy framework. Last week, on June 8th, we had 2 public presentations of the policy recommendations at the community center, and public input was sought. Tonight, Mr. Dwarka will provide a detailed presentation of his policy framework to the board, and we look forward to your comments and questions in order to better refine the proposed policies and strategies so that the policies that are implemented help the village move closer to addressing its goals for safe, affordable, and accessible housing. In order to allow for public comment for the next 2 weeks, the slides presented tonight will be available on the village website, along with the Mr. Dwarka's YouTube presentation of the slides.
Okay, trustees, can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Trustees, thanks for having me this evening to give you an update on the housing study that we've been working away at for the past several months. And I want to begin by going backwards in time a little bit. Before I was engaged by the village, there was a debate unfolding over several months and continuing into the summer in 2016 about whether or not the village of Ossining should invoke its abilities to adopt rent stabilization under the state's Emergency Tenant Protection Act. And it was a debate that was, I think, very polarizing in many ways, with a lot of views on either side. And certainly, as part of this study, it is our job to navigate the pros and cons associated with rent stabilization and to ground that evaluation in the experience of other communities, in best practices, in the returns on the policy in terms of benefits, but also in terms of its fiscal implications. But what I want to emphasize is that regardless of what direction this community goes down with respect to rent stabilization, a spectrum of different policy approaches has to be considered as part of the village's pathway forward to dealing with its housing needs. Even if the village adopts rent stabilization, there are still a number of housing issues in this community that are not addressed by rent stabilization and merit consideration of other policies, right? And so, and if you don't adopt rent stabilization, then there needs to be consideration of how to redress some of the issues that many have voiced in their embrace of rent stabilization through other mechanisms. So I say all of this because I know that, from my engagement in this community and conversations, that ETPA rises very much to the top, and perhaps with good reason, as we'll get into later into this presentation, in terms of a policy issue meriting discussion. But we consciously chose to ground the consideration of ETPA in a spectrum of housing needs, in a spectrum of different strategies that could be provided within a broader toolkit, and to look at this issue holistically, as opposed to in isolation. So let me start by just summarizing what we've learned in our time here in Ossining with regards to the major housing needs. And I'm not going to go into tremendous statistical detail here because I did so during a previous presentation before the village board, and it's online and available, where I bombarded them with a lot of statistics, as you may recall. But to summarize, to recap, in terms of the economic side here, what we know is that there are rising rents in Ossining, as there are throughout the New York metro region, and also rising housing costs, and that it is difficult for households in Ossining to afford the rent, to afford the cost of their homes, and not only because of the cost of mortgage if it's an owner-occupied home, but also because of the burden associated with property taxes, a burden that is made more extreme by the village's dependency on residential property tax and the relative smallness amount of commercial tax. And that this situation of cost burden, while it is one that is felt throughout the region, is certainly one that your community consistently and broadly voices as a key concern. The secondary issue relates to the conditions of the building stock here. And if there's one complaint that seems to rise above the rest, it is the overcrowding of your buildings, especially some of your smaller 2 or 3 family units, where indications represented by mailboxes outside, or anecdotes, or the number of cars parked in front of a building suggest that the buildings are tenanted way beyond what they should be given local and state regulations. And that this concern about overcrowding points more fundamentally to a value that the housing in Ossining should be more than simply okay. It should be high quality, that we shouldn't have a community that has substandard housing, and that inasmuch as we try in this village to redress the code violations and the overcrowding issues through the activities of the building department and through the judicial process, that we still fall short of really living up to the standard of housing and habitability that we would like to see. A third issue relates to the supply of housing within the locality and the way in which current policy instruments, namely your comprehensive plan, your zoning code, your affordable housing policy, work together in order to facilitate the development of new housing at all price points,
and whether or not these policy statements, though well-meaning in all of them and effective on many levels, are fully doing their job in terms of enabling the types of housing units that could be built in Ossining that meet the needs of your current and future residents, if the policy statements are truly supporting in reality the flow of those types of units into the village. Then there is the whole development of affordable housing, and tremendous work is happening in this community through groups like IFCA, some affordable housing developers, presence here of the housing financial entity CPC. But there is a question as to whether or not these groups, entities, individuals are enough in terms of institutional capacity to deliver the type of housing, to be able to channel the resources available, to qualify for the types of fund financing that is available. And then lastly, in terms of housing needs, is the question of gentrification, displacement. These are words often discussed, but yet very difficult to measure. What we know is, at least on a perceptual level, the reaction to rising costs of living is compelling many people to worry that Ossining may not be a place where they can raise their children, where they can age in place, and that, as new housing has come into the pipeline, priced at levels beyond what they're able to afford, that the effects of this new housing may also have implications on the rental costs and on the home values in surrounding areas, and therefore make the housing market here even more difficult with regards to affordability. So that is a quick recap of the major currents that unfolded from my firm's quantitative analysis, from our outreach, from our conversations with the community, facilitated roundtable discussions, public workshops, listening sessions. All of those things were the issues that came forth. And based on all of that information, we then began a process to look at what might be potential solutions and strategies as they have been explored in other communities, and what might be the implications should they be applied in Ossining. Let me emphasize, we did not embrace any particular strategy. We looked at the strategies in relationship to the matters which you see on the screen before, which are the housing needs. And we evaluated what the pros and cons would be of these strategies, and did so in a completely non-ideological approach. I know there's many advocates for some of these strategies. I know there's many opponents. And what we've tried to do is be as comprehensive as we can in making sure that we're covering each strategy from all sides, fighting with ourselves and trying to figure out what might be the advantage and what might be the limitation of each one. And so I am going to go through them, and I want everyone to know who's listening that this presentation is also going to be made available online. And just as we had a public workshop last week that allowed residents to evaluate the level of prioritization of the strategies, the online version of this presentation will also allow it. These slides will be posted. On YouTube will be this presentation, which is being recorded. And in addition to being able to prioritize the strategies that I'm going to go through, there will also be room for written comment, so that anyone who would like to provide a more elaborate response, we do so. And then as my team continues to develop and evaluate these strategies, we will import the public comment, and we will include that in our own document, and we will address the issues that come up and try and disentangle, with regard to the comments, what we know, what we don't know, what's speculative, what needs more research, and embed that into the document. So with that, let me now move in to our first strategy, which relates to code enforcement. And I'm aware that for some, code enforcement may not represent the most important strategy if housing affordability is one of the issues that is placed up there as being one of the most important things to address. But I would argue that an effective code enforcement system is in fact really important to the overall affordable housing strategy. The violation of building codes due to overcrowding creates distortions with regard to the valuation of certain buildings here, whereby because the rent rolls are inflated by the number of individuals who may be living in a particular home, two-family home, three-family home, the purchase value of that home is inflated. And what that means is that if a developer is trying to acquire that property in order to ensure that it is up to code and rehabilitate it and make it available as affordable housing, they may not be able to absorb the acquisition costs because the current housing is priced at a level out of proportion to what the structure's value is based on its rent rolls. So addressing the issue of code enforcement is a matter of human safety and basic habitability standards, but it is also one that is related to optimizing the overall performance of the housing market and ensuring that properties can be rehabilitated and provided at a range of price points in accordance with our building codes and regulations at the local and state level. And so one of the areas that we've really explored is how to be more proactive with regard to code enforcement. And of course, like every department throughout the country, there's way more violations that can be handled with existing capacity in the building department. And we would like to see that staffing capacity increased as being one method for increasing the supervision of compliance with the building code. But there's other things that could be done too. And one of them is to better involve the community itself in monitoring the conditions in buildings. Some localities have developed code enforcement committees where residents themselves regularly work with building department staff and they walk the streets of their neighborhood and they help the building department to become aware of potential violations of the code. Another thing a building department can do is generate really clear guidance materials about what the code says so that both landlords and tenants understand what regulations are at play, and that information flows out really easily, not just in terms of what the regs say, but also how to resolve a violation. We also think that even though the building department is the place, of course, where you've got your trained inspectors and code enforcement officers, that it's probably prudent for all village staff to at least know something about the codes and how they work. And as we are all doing our day-to-day business in the village, to be cognizant of what those regulations mean and to be able to flag them accordingly. And then finally, taking a sharp look at the current fine structure and asking whether or not it may be possible to increase those fines in order to avoid residual offenses. So these are just a set of possibilities here. And you know, they have the potential here, hopefully, to reduce the number of building violations here, but they also come with a con in the sense that code enforcement is going to require increased costs to the village if it requires more staffing. And I also think that something that many communities struggle with is they want to create a culture where the building code is enforced, and yet it's enforced in a way that is logical, that's rational, and that does not become a basis for harassment and fuel displacement of existing residents. So it's a delicate balance. That's our first strategy. Then,
Can we ask a question before you flip, or do you want to go for the whole thing?
you know, I wonder, because there's so much material, that I should probably get to the end, and then maybe as a note to all trustees, hold your questions to the end, and then let's go in deeper into them. I know that the trustees have been contemplating the viability of reactivating a landlord-tenant council, an entity which is already has been inscribed in the books. And this could be an effective alternative to the building department or the judicial system in terms of providing an alternative means for resolving disputes between landlords and tenants, And also, I think for distributing information, just the mere formation of such a council could really help the distribution of information about the code. Just by getting other landlords to know each other, just by getting tenants to know each other. The effectiveness of this council, though, is something that we're not quite sure of, just because so many communities don't have such a council. And I think one thing that my team is really trying to do as we go through all of these strategies is make sure as we put something forward that we can point to concrete successes in other neighborhoods, and we don't quite have yet. Not to say that we won't at the end of this, but we would like to provide the trustees with some clear examples of where the councils have been formed, where they've been effective, and where they've genuinely been successful also in ensuring the full diversity of tenants be part of those councils. Let's talk about the comprehensive plan. So as I mentioned earlier about the fitness of our policy documents in terms of ensuring an adequate supply of housing. Your comprehensive plan does have some good language in it regarding housing and affordable housing, but it is missing some language. For example, it's not clear enough about where are the appropriate places for higher density housing within the village. What targeted areas are most suitable for multifamily development? And it also doesn't address the issue in the zoning code, which I'm going to have to jump to, which is on the next slide, but an issue in the zoning code which allows for multifamily housing to be restricted in certain areas, which allows for even two-family homes to not allowed to be built as of right, even in two-family districts. Now there was a trend that unfolded in Ossining sometime perhaps in the 80s, I'm not quite sure when, in which Ossining, like now, was responding to the issues of overcrowding by trying to remedy its zoning code by curling back on the allowances as of right for multifamily. And if you think about it, it does make some logical sense, except it creates a situation where in areas in the village that are most suitable for multifamily development, because there already is multifamily development or two-family homes already there, that to do so now would be rendered a non-conforming use and require a property owner or developer to seek a variance in order to build something which is in fact characteristic and consistent with the surrounding area. So meanwhile, while in law, provisions for multifamily or two-family or higher density housing are not permitted, against the law, informally, higher density housing is being provided in contravention of the building code. And so one of the areas of exploration here is to make this system more rational, to enforce the code so that we don't end up with over-densification in places where it's not appropriate, but also to adjust the comprehensive plan so that from a policy perspective, it is clear about the places in which densification should occur, and it is also clear and establishes a legal basis for revising the zoning code so that it does permit multifamily and two-family in places where it's appropriate to do so. And on this next slide, I know that this map is just impossible to read from where anyone is sitting in this room, but I assure you, once it's online and you zero in on it, it really will help you to understand our analysis here, in which we looked specifically at zoning codes in particular areas where we thought adjustments could be made to further and encourage higher densities, whether in the form of allowing them to reflect the existing urban fabric, or being more liberal in allowing accessory units, or also in reducing, for new development, the amount of parking spaces required for multifamily or transit-oriented development, a trend that we've seen in many different other localities that helps to lower the overall costs of construction as well. I believe removing the barriers to development of housing of all kinds through modification of the zoning code is a very important process. It is one that could redress some of the supply questions and affect the nature of affordability for new units. Its con, however, is that the modifications to the zoning code are not going to address the existing affordability challenges of existing housing. And that doesn't mean that it's a fatally flawed proposal. It just means that it's good at doing some things better than it is in doing other things. If there is going to be greater densification in parts of the village of Ossining, one of the primary hesitations that will come up will be the impacts of that densification on parking and the capacity of the road network. Parking and traffic emerge very quickly as concerns alongside overcrowding whenever density is enabled. And this is a tough one, and I'm not going to underplay just the difficulties of doing this. Right now, you have waivers to the restrictions against overnight parking in your residential areas, and those waivers are granted, from my understanding, rather liberally, which creates a situation whereby, let's say in a 2 or 3 family house, overcrowding in a way is actually made possible because of the high number of parking permits that can be granted for any number of tenants in that area. So as a way of rationalizing it, it might make sense here to limit the number of parking permits that would be allowed for a particular dwelling unit. And it also, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to zoning, it also might make sense to reduce the overall amount of parking that as a minimum would be required for new development, so that we don't end up with further auto-oriented housing, and we end up with housing, especially in areas that are downtown and near the train station, housing that is more served by pedestrian connections and by transit. This is the third piece, and this is what's hard. Because while you are blessed with a train station, you have only a very limited local bus network, a problem faced by many communities in the Hudson Valley. And what I see here as a major con is that if you reduce the parking that's allowed in certain parts of Ossining, but you don't replace it with upgrades in the mass transit system, you do risk limiting access, especially for those individuals for whom the housing in certain parts of Ossining are the only places where they can afford such housing. Now, modifying a local transit system is not an easy thing, and many communities are frustrated by their inability to get higher frequencies of service, to modify routes. But I would argue that in any sort of updates to the comp plan or amendments to the zoning code that follow, that careful attention to parking and transportation policy and coordination with the county and with the transit operator is something that is going to be really important as well. Even if on the surface it doesn't seem like it's a housing issue, how your parking and transportation system establishes just how much density you can bring in. Then, as I mentioned earlier, with regard to the infrastructure that's available for the development of affordable housing, there's a few ways that this could be addressed. One of them might be that the village undertakes within itself, let's forget for a moment about outside entities, but the village itself becomes more proactive about the marketing and redevelopment of sites that are optimal for the type of housing that it would like to see. Now, what often happens is that there's a prime site for development, and maybe it's owned by the village, or maybe it's privately owned, but the village is not working, or the city, or the town, I don't want to pick on Ossining because this is a global phenomenon, doesn't have the resources to be working strategically on the planned redisposition of that site. And so what may end up happening is that a developer comes in and says, have I got a plan for you? And they go forward with a plan to build housing, which might all be luxury housing, or significantly composed of luxury housing, at price points which aren't affordable to current residents. But given the promise of rateables, or at least the way that it's presented, it's really easy to go for it. If you've got within your village administration now a place where you can be truly proactive, and I think a lot about the Market Square sites that are village-owned and other places where the village may be able to exercise greater initiative, you might find a better match between the sites that are available for development, the developers that are coming into the village and that are welcomed to develop here, and greater control over the type of housing so that you're truly building housing that responds to the needs of the existing community. To that end, it may also be that something that the village could do is to think carefully about the appropriate way to address tax exemption policy and pilots. And this is something which many communities are beginning to reconsider. Now, for many places, the prospects of a luxury housing development, as I mentioned earlier, are alluring because of its potential to stabilize a distressed area or to generate over the long term a certain amount of tax revenue, bonuses that might seem to warrant a generous award of a tax exemption or a pilot of some nature. But if the housing that's built does not align with the needs of the community, then it may not be appropriate to undertake that type of subsidy. And it might be more appropriate for the village to be thinking about the way in which its tax exemption policy could be aligned with the type of development that is best matching the needs of existing residents. Let's now talk about going outwards a little bit. So we've talked about the village and what they can do. And as I mentioned earlier, you've got a great partner in IFCA doing a lot of great work, not just in Ossining, but in other parts of the Hudson Valley. But something that other communities have also done in order to facilitate the development of housing is to create other types of entities that would also be part of the greater housing development community. And this ranges from across the river, Newburgh's creation of a land bank, or the formation of community development corporations, which perhaps most notably in New York City were active parts of neighborhood stabilization and ensuring a mix of housing that was built and affordable housing as part of neighborhood revitalization strategies. And there certainly are CDCs and other parts of Westchester. There could also be something called HDFCs, Housing Development Finance Corporations, whereby buildings which are rental or vacant properties are redeveloped as tenant-owned cooperative buildings. And this was a strategy that was done most broadly in New York City. You might know it through the term limited equity co-op. And what it entailed was the ability of individuals to buy their apartments, and those subject to restrictions on resale values enabled families to age in place, to not be displaced, to pursue home ownership, another important component of dealing with the overall gentrification issues. Now, not all of these entities are appropriate in all places, and one of the pieces of guidance that I believe that my team really owes this village is careful scrutiny of these entities and articulation of their pros and cons and their appropriateness here, and what might be some of the tools for overcoming the barriers to creating them, and what might be some of the benefits associated with their long-term existence and joining the overall housing development world in Austin. You have an affordable housing policy in place, and it's got a couple of main prongs, of which one of them is an inclusionary housing policy that requires that for new development, that 10% of the units in buildings with 6 or more units be built so that they are affordable, priced so that they are affordable to households that are making to less than 80% AMI. Now, that is a respectable target for inclusionary housing compared to the way that many other communities in Westchester themselves have adopted inclusionary housing. But you have a couple of options here, and one of them is to go broader, that rather than to apply inclusionary housing requirements only to 10%, you could decide to increase it to 20%. And given the income levels in the community, given the cost burden gaps, you also could go for a deeper level of affordability, bringing down the median income required from 80% down to as low as 60%, and thereby creating a wider range of price points that would be available for the new housing year. More recently, another proposal has been put on the table for Ossining, which I find very intriguing, which is a voluntary approach to inclusionary housing for existing units. Traditionally, when we talk about inclusionary housing, it refers only to new housing supply, right? So new housing units come on, and of the new units that come on, a certain percentage of them have to be affordable and to households making a certain income level. Under an alternative proposal, though, landlords could potentially, landlords who already have multifamily units, could elect to apply a certain level of affordability requirement for a portion of their units. And if that were to happen, then that would help to increase the overall pool of the number of units that would be affordable in the village of Ossining. More work, I think, needs to go in toward finding a model where that type of voluntary inclusionary housing has worked, and a better understanding the incentive structure that would be required to do it at a broad enough scale. What's great about inclusionary housing is it makes sure that as new development comes into a community, that there is at least some level of economic integration for the units that are constructed. But what's challenging about inclusionary housing, whether it's done by mandate or whether it's voluntary, or whether it applies only to new units, or whether it could be done to welcome existing units, is that it's highly restricted in terms of the scale of affordable housing that it would provide. Even if we go from 10% of housing units to 20% of housing units, the number of housing units that would be termed as affordable would be limited by the amount of new development that happens in Ossining. Now, if you were a community that was ringed by open green fields, ready and waiting for hundreds and hundreds of new multifamily housing units well served by transit, proximate to the downtown, we could look at it and say, wow, a lot of affordable housing would be generated by this. But in a community where developable land is limited and the amount of housing that could realistically be built is checked, the potential of inclusionary housing to deal with the affordability issues in the present for existing residents is limited by the amount of supply of new housing that would be created. Again, that doesn't mean it's fatally flawed. In fact, it's probably something that every community should have at this point, but it does fall short of fully dealing with all of the issues at play. Here's another one. Your current affordable housing policy has a provision that developers who don't want to contribute on site to their 10% requirement of affordable housing, if the law applies to them, that they can alternatively contribute to an affordable housing fund. And that fund will then provide money that another developer could tap into, a developer who wants to build affordable housing on their site and who could use those funds in order to meet the cost of providing that affordable housing. The gap between the amount that housing would cost to be constructed and operated and the amount that affordable housing would actually net in terms of revenue because its price was checked by the inclusionary requirements. What's problematic about the existing policy is that the regulations regarding the actual amount of contributions are not really specified, and it's not really active, and it's not really well understood. So here's a ripe area for the village, if it wants to have a housing fund policy, to make the terms clear about the way in which the contributions need to be priced, and to price those contributions in a way that still incentivizes the construction of affordable housing on site for a new development. But that if a developer opts out and instead decides to contribute to the fund, then let it be that the amount that they contribute is a sufficient level to meet the subsidy requirements for the construction of that unit elsewhere. That's policy option number 10. Finally, let's talk about rent stabilization here, right? Now, rent stabilization is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool because it can theoretically apply to a large number of units. Rent stabilization can apply to buildings that were constructed prior to 1974 in which there are 6 or more units in a locality that has shown itself to have a vacancy rate of under 5%. And this policy was designed in order to deal with the difficulties of maintaining affordable housing in the context of a highly constricted supply of housing where there is very few units that are on the market, where the vacancy level is very low. Let me be clear about the potential of invoking ETPA here compared to other strategies. As I said to you, the amount of new affordable housing units that could be constructed under inclusionary housing, under the affordable housing policy, and through other measures, is limited to the new supply of housing overall that could be built. But ETPA could potentially apply to as many as 1,200 units of housing currently in existence. And so with that regard, the effect that it would have through price controls set by a guidelines board in Westchester, governed by regulations from New York State Department of Housing and Community Renewal, would ensure that the households who have leases in rent-stabilized units would not experience dramatic increases in their rents on a year-to-year basis. That addresses an affordability issue, but it also addresses a displacement and gentrification issue. Because what it means is that if, for example, there is a proliferation of new luxury housing in a part of Austin, and if that housing has some spillover effects of increasing the cost of housing of properties within its immediate vicinity or throughout the village, and even if there isn't new development, but the housing costs in Ossining just continue to soar by virtue of the broader regional trend and the hotness of the New York City market as more people throughout the region attempt to seek affordable housing further away from the city. Rent stabilization allows those households to continue to be part of the community, to not be displaced, to not enter into an increasingly competitive housing market. There's another benefit of ETPA, and that's the provisions that mandate the renewal of the leases on a 1 or 2 year basis for the holders of those leases. And that means that for tenants who might be vulnerable to eviction or harassment from landlords, that they have a mechanism governed by state regulation, overseen by Westchester Rent Guidelines Board, clear, articulate, transparent, of ensuring that their leases would be renewed. And so that provides, again, for a large number of households, a substantive protection against displacement. Those are the most powerful benefits associated with rent stabilization. And I would argue that probably someone can go through each one of them and come up with a weakness associated with those very benefits too. And I want to describe to you some of what those weaknesses are, just as honestly as I conveyed to you what the benefits are of ETPA. Let us start in terms of who ETPA rent stabilization benefits. There really isn't a provision that regulates that rent stabilized units must go to households who are most in need of them, right? Remember when I talked about the AMI requirements for inclusionary housing, whereby affordability is related to someone's income level? While there are at the extremes in the law provisions that allow a unit to be unregulated based upon the rent of the apartment or the income level of the household, the reality is that there's no regulatory infrastructure in place to make rent stabilization a need-based affordable housing program. So that a household that actually may be making a substantive amount of income would still be able to stay within a rent stabilized apartment. Moreover, because of the succession allowances within the law, they also would be able to bestow that apartment to a subsequent tenant within their immediate family. This creates a tricky situation because it means that the rent stabilization provisions are not just not aligned with affordable housing need in a legal sense, but it also creates a situation where the tenants of a rent stabilized unit are incentivized to stay, potentially for a very long time, even if the unit no longer meets their needs, which in turn, as critics will argue, has an adverse effect on the supply, because as those units don't move, if you will, in the market, as the market becomes constricted, and only those units that don't fall within that bandwidth of buildings, built before 1974, those are the units that are out there in the rental market, and therefore are vulnerable to very high costs of housing because there's a limited number of housing units in the community that are available. Those are amongst the top cited critiques of rent stabilization. But there are some other ones too. There are also concerns that if a landlord's profitability is checked by rent stabilization price controls, while maintenance costs, as a result of the natural flow of an economy, inflation, and rising construction costs occur, that the capacity of that landlord to meet the maintenance costs required for the ongoing rehabilitation of the building would be compromised, an issue that would run contrary to the code enforcement objectives that we've also talked about earlier. Now, what the literature has to say, professional literature, on the impact of rent stabilization on the maintenance of buildings is a bit unclear. You see it both ways, but it's something to note. Another complication associated with it is the way in which rent stabilized buildings could potentially affect the tax revenue that the village collects. Because if the profitability of a building over time is reduced as a result of the price controls, and if that reduction in profitability compared to what it would have been had there been no price controls continues, then it's all but certain that the owner of that building will, whether by grievance or simply by the natural process, have a building valued at a lower level than what it would be otherwise, thereby potentially creating a situation where the village may then have to make up the shortfalls for the lost revenue that it would have collected from a building, because the revenue for the rental buildings is driven by their profitability. And then the question is raised, who then absorbs the cost of that gap, especially as we're concerned about the capacity of our residents to age in place, who may have paid off their mortgages, but are still struggling in an income-restricted household economic situation to meet their tax burden, right? So this is another piece of it. Now, in some communities, you might not worry as much about the implications that rent stabilization would have on the valuation of homes and on the tax bill if a relatively small number of units would be subject to rent stabilization. But Austening's in a different category from many communities. And in fact, if it is possible to apply rent stabilization to as many as 1,200 units or somewhere within that family, then the implications that it could have in terms of the impact on the tax revenue could be substantive and something that we'll look at carefully. I don't mean to exaggerate. I don't mean to say that all of a sudden everyone's taxes are going to double. I mean to flag it as a con that merits some close scrutiny. There is a couple other issues. There are the administrative costs associated with shouldering the program, and in all honesty, I know some of the trustees are concerned about it, and I don't have a good answer yet about what in reality are those administrative costs, and we will continue to research it. And then finally, I think that there's an outstanding question here, and a threshold question about how a community qualifies for rent stabilization under the state regulations that require evidence of a 5%, of a below 5% vacancy level. A statistic which multiple people have attempted to determine. However, a statistic which is somewhat elusive because of the ambiguities in the enabling legislation on ETPA and the subsequent guidance, which is less than clear about the appropriate methodology for undertaking such a survey. And so one of the things that my team will be doing is to the best of our ability to determine what are the ranges of ways in which the survey can legitimately be done under the DHCR guidance, under the enabling legislation, and what are the implications of those methodological restrictions as they may or may not have arisen in disputes in courts of law over ETPA, on the ability of the village to embrace the numbers that have been presented before it so far with regard to vacancy. That was a long list of cons. I realize that. And by no means was that my effort to make the argument for why ETPA should not be adopted. At the end of the day, the pros that I identified, especially in terms of the expansive affordability, the protections against displacement, are difficult to replicate through other strategies. Not impossible to hit at, but this is one for which there is a continuum of ways to go on it. And as we continue to probe it, our job is to provide the trustees with the best information we possibly can about the experience that other communities, not New York City, but other communities like Austining have had in terms of meeting their housing needs through rent stabilization, but by housing needs, I also include within it the importance of fiscal solvency as well. And then finally, our 12th option relates to the promotion of commercial development. And this is something that I think is really important. I know my firm was engaged to look at housing, but housing isn't something that can be analyzed in a vacuum. When we look at the revenue that's collected for commercial development, the very small amount of revenue that the village collects on commercial development, it concerns us about the implications this has on the tax rates applied to owners of residential property. And that with a more diverse tax base, at least some controls could be established on the incremental increases of tax burdens for homeowners. That's one piece of it. But there's another piece here, which is that the problem of affordable housing is really difficult to solve because it's not one in a vacuum specific only to Austining. The challenges in being able to afford housing is a regional challenge. There are open questions about to what extent every community should shoulder the fair responsibility to redress regional housing needs. And there is a hard reality that no matter how much subsidy we put toward affordable housing, no matter how much we regulate, require affordable housing, the reality is that when income levels are low, when economic mobility options are limited, that a household's capacity to be able to afford the rent is limited. And so I would argue that every single approach to housing affordability in any community also has to look at what the economic development options are, what opportunities are there for creating partnerships with educational institutions, workforce development programs, so that over the long term, especially with your young people, there is a pathway to economic mobility, that the gap between the cost of housing and income is redressed not only through interventions in the housing market, but also in economic empowerment of households to make a greater livelihood as well. That concludes this presentation. And from this point on, as I mentioned earlier, and as Lynn noted at the beginning, our job over the next 4 weeks is to drill down even deeper into these different strategies and to evaluate them in terms of what we think will be their effectiveness in meeting the needs. And with this, I would like to perhaps corral back our trustees to your table and welcome questions, and my associate Robert Joseph and I are happy to respond to them.
Well, as everybody's getting back to their seat, I'll just thank you very much for, and Robert Joseph, we didn't introduce you. I know you've been working hard with Kevin to work on this project. It's quite an undertaking, and housing is something that the board has put at the top of our list to really proactively understand, and we're really grateful to have this objective outside analysis of where we are, as well as your research on so many other municipalities and what has been successful, and then what might be wise for us to consider. I have no doubt that we're going to be moving forward with more than one of these, maybe not all of them, and I guess finding the right mix is what we're going to be working on in the next few weeks. I'll just reiterate to folks, all of this is going to be online, not just in video form to watch the presentation, but we're actually soliciting people's feedback. And Kevin and Robert, you're going to then compile all of that for those of us on the board to really be able to digest it. And then we are going to be, 5 of us and any relevant staff in one way, reflecting it back to you, our further questions, concerns, priorities, observations, to be incorporated into a final report that you're going to be presenting to us next month, correct?
That's correct. The only thing I would add, Mayor, is that our final report will also reflect a synthesis of everything that we hear from the community, so that it's out and open what the debates have been. And one of the things that Robert and I have been doing is going back into the trail, the media trail, the meeting minutes from previous meetings, correspondence that was generated about ETPA, rent stabilization, so that the whole bigger picture in terms of the ongoing input that the village has received will be absorbed within the document.
Thank you. Well, you did have an opportunity. Some of us were able to attend last week, and so we've heard pieces of this presentation anyway. And you've also provided us in advance with information via email. So I imagine that my colleagues on the board have questions and comments.
I had a chance to see the evening presentation last week, and certainly was pleased with all the options that you provided for us. There's a lot to digest here. I'm not going to get into anything specific right now, but I think this is quite comprehensive, and I'm very pleased with the options that you provided for us. And I think a lot of them are, are very appropriate based on the data you gathered, the interviews you had, and everything else. I guess all I can say is I'm just very pleased. And I think I think the thing I like about you, Kevin, is that you really try to place an even hand on the discussion by really talking about the pros and cons of every single one, every single recommendation that you make. And I think that it's going to be difficult to sort through this. I know for myself, I was feeling pretty humbled in the back of the room as you went through every single one, and kind of drawing the line down the middle of the page and saying, here's what's good, and here's what's maybe not so good. So I appreciate your even hand and the analysis, and obviously I look forward to the feedback that you get and your synthesis of other information. So thank you very much.
Thanks for not answering my question earlier, because it probably was best, I think, to really go through the dozen issues. I just really more point of clarification. So there's a discussion about punitive, punishment, right? Like you charge people more for bad behavior and reward them for good, etc. So it's the first time I saw the Iceland example. I'm actually very familiar with. So aside from $1 million, which sounds great in revenues, that tells me that there were a lot of violations, a lot of issues, right? Did it actually, the money's nice, but did it actually solve a problem? Did it actually reduce those sort of problematic overcrowding housing that is in Iceland?
I don't know if it solved the overcrowding problem, but my recollection is that Iceland did see a reduction in the number of violations, especially after about a year's time. They saw that it was working, that there were fewer violations, and properties were maintained better as a result.
I mean, I like the escalating fines concept, if you could actually go, but I'm more interested in getting rid of overcrowded housing than the revenue source in and of itself. So that's really, I'd like to actually learn more about that. For me, that was a big piece. I want to thank you about looking at parking. Read a lot of studies, in the past year, looking at cities. There are these studies about 11 metro areas in the United States. This is beyond a regional issue. It's an issue at every metropolitan area in the United States, from Washington, D.C. to Los Angeles to Chicago. It is, in my opinion, not an Ossining issue. It is New York State and really a big national problem. So I very much appreciate how you encapsulate it for us so that we can look at it. But including the parking, I really want to hear more about that as you go through your synthesis, because we talk a lot about parking, but I'm sort of intrigued at the pros and cons of managing parking, what that will get. So thank you for doing that, because that's sort of struck me. I never think of it in pros and cons, so I appreciate that. I'm going to look into that a little bit more as you guys go through it. And I just have one sort of more logistical. So you have headers in Spanish, but the document is not. Are you going to do the document in Spanish, or I sort of felt like you were starting, but it wasn't clear what was going on there?
Well, we are looking into the possibility of having the document or sections of it translated into Spanish. And the other thing that is also being explored now is the possibility. We've tried, to be perfectly honest, from the day one, to do the best outreach we could with the Spanish-speaking community, and to be perfectly honest, with not tremendous success. But one of the ideas, true, that has been out there is to, just as we had those 2 listening sessions last week to go over this presentation, to work with, and we had headsets and translation that was available there, but we may be able to engage, a native Spanish speaker who would actually run the presentation, and that way have, another venue in which people would be able to better understand what the ideas are that are presented here.
Thank you. Just kind of piggybacking what Rika just said in regards to the translation in Spanish. I'm not sure how is that being done, but I think you may want to double check some of that, the meaning of it, because some of that stuff is just not translated properly. That was my comment on a previous flyer as well, but it was too late to revise it and it was already out. And I think it's important if we are going to translate this to any language to be consistent and correct. Grammar is, is needed on this. It seems that we're not making serious questions, I guess, in regards to some of the questions. I do have a lot of questions, but I think I'm not gonna go through all of them, but I do want to mention a couple of them in regards to. I'm a little bit peaked in regards to the building department portion of it, so I like the concept of putting information out there for the public to be informed of the process. Just as a side note, I have done that before, and I think I will keep pushing our building department to do that, which I have taken that as a project for myself to give a little bit of that to our building department here. So I think it was kind of interesting to see that as a part of the presentation. So I want to thank you for that. One thing that you did mention on the beginning of your statement was the previous presentation, you gave us a lot of information, and you did. And there was a lot critical information that sometimes, as a person, as a community, sometimes we don't want to hear it, even though we may be aware of what's going on, but it's important to see what that is. And what you mentioned then, it was the overcrowding in the percentage of the overcrowding. I didn't see that percentage because you said it was an estimate, that you didn't want us to hold on to the specific number and what it was in relationship to Westchester County. So you kind of completed that part. Has that number changed? Has it?
No, we're reluctant to essentially publish these numbers and make them public because they're estimates. They're from the American Community Survey's 5-year data, which means that they are a representation of 5 years from 2011 to 2015, and they're an average of incomplete survey data from those years. It's a survey, it's not the census, it does not take stock of the entire village. It's just a survey that has a margin of error, especially in a community like this one, where where the population isn't very large. The margin of error can be quite high. And while the numbers may be correct, we want to be cautious that we don't disseminate this information.
I understand that. Thank you. The presentation that, in regards to the title itself, it was what it was stated was about housing and the stock and safety and everything else. But I like the part that you actually added to the end, the commercial portion of this, which I think is important because that's what I remember when I came to the village many years back. There was a few factories still left from back in the days. So I don't think we're going to ever see that back, but I think something along those lines, which a lot of the communities have been doing. Yonkers has done a lot of that, bring some light industrial, commercial stuff into the communities. Beacon has done the same thing. Wappingers has done some of that as well. So Peekskill has done a lot of that stuff as well. So I think it's important for us to understand that it's not just about housing, and it's just not about bringing people into this, but it's also about bringing jobs that will help our community. The last item for me, for now, is schools and how this is going to affect our school system. Because I think even though we don't have anything to do, we're not a school board, but I think we have to be cautious in how we do this for the future of our community itself. We do worry about the overcrowding of our housing, but we have to keep that in mind that more housing, that means more kids at some point, and that means more kids going to our school system. So how does that affect? Have you looked at the effect in that?
It's a really good question, and it's a tough one, and there's a couple of dimensions to it. The first one is to what extent would increasing the supply in housing necessarily place an increased demand on the school district, knowing, and I acknowledge, that the rate of increase of the enrollment population in your school district is significant compared to other school districts. On the other hand, much of the housing need that is in Ossining is not necessarily translated into housing that generates always large volumes of school children, especially housing that responds to the needs of an older community seeking to age in place, younger people who are looking for housing in downtown areas or near the train station area. So that's one level of it. There's a second level of it too, though, which is I do think that the issues of school capacity are important, but part of the overall quality of the educational experience is also shaped by the quality of housing and habitability too. So regardless, I think it is an aspect that we have to deal with in terms of making sure the kids that are growing up in Ossining are growing up under good living conditions too. And that, I think, is where we're looking at the building conditions as one piece of this as well. And there's a third piece here, which is it possible to be more creative about the ways in which new developers contribute to the costs associated with the school district and the increased enrollment of students and the trend? And we can explore it, but I also want to put a caveat that because of the nature of the school district, well, of school districts themselves, and the ways in which funding allocations are determined, and the assumptions that are behind them going way beyond the local level, this is a hard one for us to deal with, because it is not entirely within your purview to determine how funding and investment choices are made for the expansion of those school districts. So we're trying, in terms of dealing with the limitations of how we can affect school funding and investment policy, and at the same time, trying to not exaggerate what could be the potential detriment of the increased population associated with new housing, and also aware that new housing, may also serve, or rehabilitated housing may also serve a really important need for your school children. So.
Correct, thank you. And well, that goes back to something that you mentioned as well, which is zoning in our current zoning districts. And to me, it's more like kind of becomes like an urban planning at the end of the day, where you have to look at it as an overall master plan on the whole area to try to minimize the effect in the next 5 to 10 years project. So, but that's something I guess the board will have to look into that and determine what will be the best way to approach this, keeping in mind that it will have an effect, a long-term effect to the school systems as well. So,
Thank you, Kevin. I've had a chance to look at the presentation a few times. So, I'll be contacting you. I think you did a thorough job of giving us 12 options to look at. And I look forward to deliberating with the board and, which way we should go, or when we should actually implement it.
All right, thank you very much. I'll just, I want to point out to the public that, as was acknowledged, the feedback will be online for 2 weeks for the public. That's the 2-week time frame for all of us on the board as well. So it's great if people can get on there as soon as possible and get that information out there. So the more that we have early on in this process, then the longer it is that we have to be able to really internalize it and take it in. Although we will have a chance to see all of it, we're going to simultaneously be writing our own comments and questions for Kevin and Jonathan to incorporate. And I'll say after the presentation, one of the public presentations last week, there was a criticism that you were too balanced in your presentation. There were folks, particularly on ETPA, which is an issue that people have really been debating for a number of months here in Ossining. There was somebody who was very supportive of ETPA who told me that you had too many criticisms of it, and somebody who was very against ETPA who felt that you were obviously way too supportive of it. So you clearly did an excellent job at making nobody happy who's really dug in. But for those of us who are a little ambivalent, it's very helpful to have a genuine assessment of it. I appreciate that. I'll just reiterate one more time that there were 12 pathways for us to consider, and while ETPA is one that we've been discussing the most and is sort of at the front of people's minds when they think about housing issues. These are really a variety of pathways for us to achieve our goals of safe, affordable, accessible housing in our community. And I appreciate all the work that you've done, and I'm grateful to serve on this board that's willing to delve into it so passionately and so thoughtfully.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, trustees, for having us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. Our last item on the agenda before the board goes into executive session. With us this evening, we have representatives from Ossining River Associates with regard to the proposed Snowden Woods project. Some months ago, they made an initial presentation on a proposed project. This presentation this evening is a procedural one. I'm going to turn it over to Corporation Counsel in a minute to give you the details of that. Before we do that, I'd like to welcome to the microphone Mr. Joe Ariel, counsel for the associates. And with him this evening, he has Valerie Menastra, planner for VHB, retained planner for the project, and Mr. Doug Salas from Ossining River Associates. Stuart?
Thank you, Paul. Mayor, members of the board. The applicant through council is here tonight. They are requesting, as we've discussed before, a text amendment to the zoning code, which pursuant to our chapter 270 results in a referral to the planning board after consideration by this board. So I did briefly discuss this with the board, I think 1 or 2 work sessions ago, but felt it was appropriate to have Mr. Ariel here to basically formally present it to the board as to what it is. So without further ado, Joe, I'll turn it over to you.
Good evening. Thank you for having us on the agenda this evening. I know you had a busy night, and so we'll keep this brief. As Mr. Khan has pointed out, this is, at this point in time, a procedural step, which is to get it to the planning board for substantive review of the proposed plan and their ultimate recommendation on the proposed text amendment. The proposal is for a 198-unit residential development and the construction of a new firehouse on more or less the pad that it's on right now, but to upgrade that to current standards. And the process, just so we're clear, I want both the board and the public to understand what we anticipate, so there's no misunderstanding. We anticipate asking neither this board nor the planning board for any action on the zone text amendment or the site plan until there's a full secret review. So we just want to give everybody comfort. This is an initial step. After this step, or as part of the initial review by the planning board, typically, in my experience, because ultimately it results in a large development of land, even though it is this board that needs to take action on the zone text amendment ultimately, it is often the planning board that serves as lead agency under secret. in such a matter, and they may do that. They may choose to do that. You may choose to do that. And we do not have a preference. Again, there is no effort. That is a discussion for either your board or theirs. It is not an action we're asking you to make a decision on tonight either. I'm just letting you know that from our perspective, we recognize that that is something that may have to do with your past practice, your comfort level with who performs that task. But in any event, the planning board would certainly do a pretty substantial review of the project and its impacts before we ask either board to take any action on it. We do anticipate a full secret review. So this evening, as your village manager and village council have mentioned, all that's being discussed is the referral of the matter, having received the application to the planning board so it can get on one of their agendas so they can get their initial review of the package. And we also understand tonight is a work session, so we don't anticipate that action taking place tonight, but we're here to answer any questions that you have. No happy news.
I did not bring the booklets for everyone. I apologize. I could talk louder than that. I did not bring the presentations tonight. I did to our last meeting, and I do have them for all the board members when they want to review. As council has indicated, this is an application for a text amendment. We did receive from council for one of the property owners in the vicinity a fairly lengthy letter listing a number of reasons why this matter either should not be referred or ultimately referred if there should not be a text amendment and any change made to the area. And that's a matter that will certainly have to be considered. But at this particular stage, it is a request for a zoning text amendment. And Joe, maybe you can just give a very brief overview as to what the nature of the text amendment is so that the board can get a better idea.
Yes. So the idea of the text amendment is to allow for an increased density, maximum density, where certain specific benefits are realized by the proposal. In this case, what's been modeled as part of the proposed text amendment, and again, this is all subject to discussion and push and pull as we go through the process. But the notion behind, philosophy behind the potential zone text amendment has several key points. The first is, it is not a zoning change. It is not a request to change this zone to some other zone or create a new zone. It is a proposal to allow for an overlay where certain conditions are met. The gateway provisions that we have suggested, because you want to do a few things. One, you want to achieve the goals of the zone and the comprehensive plan, consistent with the comprehensive plan, but also you want to do that with some sense that you can limit the potential impacts so that it can't just happen ad hoc in numerous locations with sort of a real concern about the long-term planning implications. So there are some gateway provisions provided in the zone text amendment proposal that would address both those things. The first is that, and apropos of your discussion that you just had with your consultant on affordable housing, we are proposing that any applicant that wishes to take advantage of this overlay in the district would have to propose at least 15% affordable housing component. The second is that it would have to be a parcel of a certain size, an assemblage of a certain size, to allow appropriate conservation goals to be met on the site, which again, it would be in keeping with both the zone and the comprehensive plan as it states its goals for that zone. And then you would have to set a certain minimum percentage, an increase above the typical for the zone, aside as protected undeveloped land. So once again, the notion is you have to have an applicant that was both willing and able, based on both the site and their own desire to develop the property and ability to develop the property, to meet all of those thresholds so that those specific goals are advanced as opposed to being compromised. So that is the notion behind the zone text amendment. And I do have a concept plan here, hard copies of a concept plan if you want to see it. But again, I'm happy to pass them out. I don't know the extent to which the board wants to engage in the discussion at this point, but we're happy to do it.
We can certainly take that and have it here if the board would like to look at that. If you look, I do have a copy of the petition that does, because it was substantial, it doesn't have every exhibit, but what it does have is a copy of that proposed zone text amendment, if you'd like to see that. I think I have 5 of them, so. I'll give that to them. Yeah, that's fine. Board members get that. I have 9 of my own, so you'll get more.
These other books are just a digital.
It's gone up and down. I'm not gonna go back to that.
So let me understand this in the logic, and actually, Val is a great person to have on hand because she was our planner for a decade, so she's intimately familiar with that as well as with what you're looking to do here. So this is an overlay zone potentially, essentially that's being proposed here.
That's correct.
Where else do we have overlay zones in the village right now? Is it just down by the waterfront? Is it Ginsburg, I think, is an overlay zone? Are there others? Right, which would be Sparta and the downtown, which are a very different type of overlay zone. How does this compare to, in similarity or difference fundamentally from what is at the waterfront with the Ginsburg?
This would be similar to the type of overlay zone that is in the PWRD, but clearly the densities as well as the proposals for the amenities are different, and it's different, it's structured differently, but it's a similar type of zone.
And I should mention too, I can't believe that I forgot it, but one of the other limiting factors, those gateway provisions that I talked about, to the overuse of a provision like this, is that it also requires a substantial capital improvement to the benefit of the municipality. Whereas some of your provisions, and it's not unusual, this would be the case in other municipalities as well, talk about off-site improvements that are, anything from, do some art to, they become substantive criteria for how highly are these things valued. In this case, it was specifically written so that an applicant would have to make a capital contribution, something you could touch and feel to the municipal benefit. So again, the notion is that you'd have to have you'd have to have a substantial property that could protect enough area to be consistent with the conservation zone and have significant benefits for the community to even get in the door for consideration under this overlay.
And in addition, the minimum acreage is 10 acres, which in your conservation development district, you don't have a lot of, as you heard earlier, there's not a lot of land that has 10 acres or more where this overlay would become applicable.
Are there any?
we have to take a look at that, but I think, very few. Avalon, when that property is already developed, none that is undeveloped at this point, besides this particular.
Just from a perspective, I know sometimes overlay zones can be a little bit controversial because of that, because I know we're talking about, we're essentially, spot zoning is a term that's kind of,
Overused.
well, it raises questions and concerns. So how is this not spot zoning if we're creating an overlay zone that actually there's no other properties where it could be applicable? And is that a concern for us from a legal perspective?
Well, because it would have to be addressed, and issues like that would certainly be addressed during the review process, the secret review process in terms of impacts of the proposed change. I think it can be addressed, or wouldn't propose it, and we'll get there. But I think that's why the language of the proposed text amendment talks about an assemblage. So what is possible, as you probably know, is that it may be that as you look at the map today, you don't necessarily see numerous sites where this is possible, but it's not without precedent, obviously, that people put together assemblages that would qualify. I think if you could take advantage of a provision like this and could also provide the village with these advantages, the increased affordables and the capital improvements, you might be highly incentivized to do that, and that would create a positive outcome, I think, for the village. But that is all part of the consideration that this board and the planning board would undertake as part of the process. We understand it as an issue, and it certainly will be addressed as we go forward.
One of the benefits of overlay zones, just in general, is that it allows you to apply particular parameters in a certain area of a zone, but doesn't necessarily mean that every property within that zone gets to undertake those particular parameters or additional amenities. However, it doesn't preclude other properties at some point in time for also taking advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, just a quick clarification. Maybe you could, with incentives, what is the current maximum number of units that would be allowable right now? As of right.
Yeah, it's 8 dwelling units per acre. 8.
No, but how many acres do we have here?
4.
Yeah, in other words, I'm looking, I want to understand what as of right, where you are now, where we are.
It's about 14 acres. There are some deductions that would have to be taken into account. But that gives you the general parameter of the possible density.
So what's the total number of units then?
We think it's 112, but again, I say that with some reservation because there might be some
Okay, thank you.
And I will say on that point, I'm glad you brought it up, and I'm not suggesting that this is, determinative of the issue, because we do expect to have a full public discussion about this and with both of your boards about it. It does comport with densities in the district. So it's not, and we were very careful not to, to consider this from a planning perspective and be sensitive to the reality of what's going on in the village and what it appears as though the village would like to do. And we try to be sensitive to that. And we can, as we go forward, we will show you exhibits that will show that in that corridor, it's very, in fact, there are other neighboring districts where the density is potentially higher, and other recently approved proposals where the density was higher. So we've tried to be sensitive to that concern.
Stuart, I guess this is a question for you as I'm looking at the proposed overlay district, understanding that you need at least 10 acres. Then it says development proposal must include 15% affordable units. Given the conversation that we just had, could we set what affordable means as far as AMIs with the particular overlay district?
I mean, if I may, Stuart, I think I'm willing to offer, and it makes George Johnson's here. We anticipate that I will be part of the dialogue. And we've already opened a dialogue with, I always get this acronym wrong, IFCA, about the needs. We heard from you, by the way, as well. Several of you had comments about the particular needs on AMI and size of units when we presented last time. We were open to that type of discussion. And the simple answer is that because this is a discretionary approval, everything's on the table as far as what ultimately gets approved. So we're happy to engage in that dialogue. I'm not suggesting that the client's in a position to just, do sort of anything that's asked, but I will say that we anticipate that dialogue and that we want to be sensitive to the actual needs. Again, not just taking some number and saying we check that box, but being responsive to the needs. And in fact, we are very interested in what was presented here tonight, and I'll follow up to stay engaged in that process and try to be in lockstep with what you were looking for.
Okay.
There's a lot to discuss about this project, big picture, going down the road, why we may want to consider it, what are the reasons why some people are very concerned about it. Right now it's open space, as we've acknowledged. There's not a lot of contiguous open space still available in the village, and right now this is woods, essentially. So there are certainly some concerns from folks in the neighborhood. At the same time, some of the public benefits, whether it's a large portion of affordable housing, it's more accessible than what we have right now, as well as the firehouse, which is certainly a big motivator because that's a really significant capital expense that we wouldn't have to undertake as taxpayers. So there's a lot to balance here, and it's not nothing's gonna happen immediately. So what the ask is right now is to put something on the agenda for next week, which would be a resolution requesting a referral to the planning board for consideration of feedback on the text amendment.
Similar to the situation we had with 145 North Highland, same type of situation.
Okay, so is there any reason that I'm comfortable with putting that as a resolution for next week? Can I hear from my colleagues on the board? Are you comfortable putting that on as a resolution for next week, which would be a request from the planning board for feedback on the proposed text amendment?
I guess my question is, if we move it to the planning board, when are you guys coming back to us to negotiate some of this?
We would, first of all, we would come back whenever you want us, and I mean that sincerely. So if at any point you want to put us on an agenda, I'm sure you will track the review at the planning board. We'll be happy to keep you posted on that. Your consultant will keep you posted on that. And if at any point you want us back because you've got specific concerns, questions, you want answers from us, we'll come back. From a purely procedural perspective, I will tell you that, as I said when we started, the idea would be that the secret process would start, which allows for a full discussion of all the impacts and benefits, et cetera, and that ultimately it would come back here with that full record for you to dig your teeth into and then have an opportunity, again, to test any concerns or issues that you have, including your own public hearing on the zone text amendments. We anticipate that being a substantial process, just so we're clear. We're not looking to steamroll that process at all.
So just to be clear, if it goes to the planning board and it goes to the secret, then it'll come back to us, and if we have any further conversations before we enact it, we can.
And you'll also be an involved agency throughout the secret process, so you'll be able to comment on all the secret documents as you go through the secret process.
Okay.
So, as you noted before, Mr. Khan, I think you indicated that there was a letter from an adjoining property owner.
Correct.
From their legal counsel?
Yes.
With objections to the referral?
Correct. That was dated the 24th of May.
I mean, I'm not looking to necessarily delay that, but I think I would want to get a little bit more advice from you about that letter and the content of that letter
I'd be happy to.
and understanding any legal implications of the actual referral in terms of any legal complications there.
That's fine.
So I would tend to defer the referral until I have a better understanding of that.
I can do that. I think all of you were provided with a copy of counsel's letter. I'll be more than happy to go over that with you. Also in terms of issues as to, lead agency status and everything that relates in terms of the referral. But that's fine. I have no problem with doing that, so I can provide advice to counsel to the board with regard to that before that resolution goes.
Thanks. Thank you, John, actually, for bringing that up, because that was the only concern that I had is in regards to, at some point, I was abstaining myself from the last vote that was forward to the planning board because I had some reservations in regards to that particular case. We didn't finish which was almost done with the housing study that I just had a presentation about. Anyway, I don't think we had before, and Stuart, please correct me if I'm wrong, before we even send anything to the planning board, don't we have to have an agreement between the five of us to move forward if we think that this project is going to move forward or not, regardless of how does that?
The code provides that all requests for zoning text amendments shall be referred to the planning board. Now that can be interpreted two ways. I mean, this board can still obviously determine what it wants to refer, but the language on its face is all applications go to the planning board, which reviews it and sends it back here on a 62-day cycle for then the public hearing and everything else. There is certainly a question as to whether the board would have a discretion to say, we don't want to send this particular application on. Because remember, at the end of the day, if it is referred and comes back, you would then be holding a full public hearing, at which time, there would be testimony, there would be people coming in, and the board, based upon that record at a public hearing, would determine if the overlay district is proposed is in fact something to be approved.
There's no question that you as a legislative board control your agenda, and as Stuart says, when it comes back, you control that process. But I would offer, and Mr. Collins will provide you his independent legal counsel, but I would offer to you that this is essentially an administrative step called for in the board. It does not send this board down a legally significant slippery slope of any kind. In other words, the code says refer it, it gets referred. Frankly, the risk is all ours. We've gone to great expense and resources to put the package together, and we'll do so again as we go to the planning board and pursue this with them. Again, I will leave it to Mr. Khan to provide independent counsel on that point, but since I'm here tonight and I'm advocating for my client, I think that is what you will ultimately be comfortable with. I don't think it's you're not blessing the project by referring it. It's just an aspect of the process that I think the code calls for. And I'm saying that I'm representing the applicant, so nobody,
Thank you. The other part that, just as a side note, I guess, to the public, because there are some neighbors that are concerned about this particular project, is that I wouldn't want to be part of any conversations in regards to, how many affordable units are we going to put, what's the percentage of that, unless we actually, the board has made a decision in regards to this particular project that is going to go forward.
I agree. I just don't think this is the point at which you should do that. I completely agree that needs to be a full dialogue. And we will also be responsive to the neighbors' concerns and to yours with respect to that. So no question about it.
Okay.
Because as you go through the secret process, all this stuff will get digested and worked through. And so there will be a whole chapter, you know, ideally, if you end up going to environmental impact statement, you know, they can be looking at a chapter dealing with land use policies, land use, you know, how to form street comprehensive plan, your level of MRP. They would also look at other aspects of what types of amenities that can provide, so all that would be sort of contained. And at that, as we move to that, that's when the whole dialogue starts taking place.
And as an involved agency, as Valerie said earlier, that could also include your providing those precise questions that you're talking about now as things that you want addressed in the process.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I would just say that somebody who has been through and experienced numerous secret processes, I take that quite seriously. And the fact that we have received a letter from a neighbor through legal counsel gives me pause to really understand the merits of those arguments. And the institutional process of secret is pretty overwhelming. It is, some call it a siege, some call it a journey. It's a lot of different things. And I believe I want to have a pretty clear understanding of the merits of the letter and the institutional effort that the village will have to go through to bring this process to a conclusion, whatever that may be. So I hope you would show some forbearance, at least so that I can deliberate. I don't know how the rest of my colleagues feel, but I would feel a little better if I had some commentary from corporate counsel and had the chance to reflect myself. So
I understand, and I will tell you that there is no benefit to my client to playing fast and loose with secret. It is a strict compliance statute, and I agree with you that it's important that we are procedurally correct in how we proceed.
One point I just want to make to the members of the board. Some of the issues that will have to be detailed at a later time will be, for example, dedication of parkland, should we get to that stage. You know, a LATA agreement, agreements with regard to transfer of properties relates to the firehouse. Right. Those are all, you know, when we get, that's further down the road. So that's not at this stage at all, but it is something that would ultimately have to be discussed. But I will certainly review the correspondence with council and have certainly have advice of council with the board members to go over the issues that Trustee Codman is raising.
Yeah.
One question, because I may not be here next time you guys come back. I always like to ask these two developers. Part of one of the first presentations of our previous presentation was about pilots. Are you guys fully funded to do this project if it ever goes through?
Yes.
If it goes through.
Yes, this is a family-owned business which owns this property. And Doug, please feel free, but I'm comfortable saying they have owned the property for a long time. They are 30 years. They are embedded in the community. They live in the town. The patriarch of the family was involved in a lot of the infrastructure that's in place in this town early in his development career. They own and operate through affiliations with other entities, numerous commercial projects as well. There's no question that they are fully capable of funding the project.
Just for the record, I have heard similar comments from previous developers as well. So
yeah.
I hope this one will be different, if that's the case. Thank you.
I appreciate the concern, and Doug can tell you that from the first day he called me, I told him that somebody on this board was going to say exactly that, and that it was important that once we come in, that we be ready to get to the finish line. Am I right?
We paid taxes for 30 years.
So I appreciate the question, duly noted, and I think you'll be pleased.
I guess my last question is going to be about the timeline, and Trustee Codman has raised questions about having an opportunity to get advice of counsel on what the legal implications could be from the neighbors who have expressed concern about even taking this step. requesting referral from the planning board. I mean, obviously, the planning board, they have a calendar. There's certain dates by which you need to submit things in order to get on the agenda for the following month. So if you miss things by a week, then you're really waiting, a month and a half to be able to get something to happen. So what is a logical next step to be able to honor the concerns of the board members to be well-informed? Or is this something that's easily understood in a phone call in the next 5 days? Or is this something that we're talking about like 3 weeks from now and put it on a resolution?
Okay, I'll answer all those questions. Yes, no, no. I would think that at next week's meeting, we have an advice of counsel. I will be able to provide responses to a number of the questions that have been raised by Trustee Cotton. That would then permit the board in 2 weeks, which would be the 28th. Now, I won't be here on the 28th, so it's really, I know that's hard to believe. I will not be here. But we could do that. Now, in terms, so I think it's a matter that we can do that. If I think I need additional time, I will let obviously all the board members know, because I'd rather have all the T's crossed and I's dotted before I give advice of counsel on the particular issues that are being raised here. So I do want to do that. In terms of it ultimately getting to the planning board, what I can say, and I know that I think Lynn was here and she's still back there, what we did with 145 North Highland is that when the resolution was passed, we were able to basically get it on the planning board agenda, which was only 8 days later, because all the documents were essentially there. So we were able to do that. So we'll look at what the planning board schedule is. They, I believe, are the last Tuesday of every month. So they they have a meeting, at the end of June, and then they're going to have the next will be in July, in terms of getting on schedules. So we should be in a position that after I give my advice, the board will be able to make a determination as to whether it does the referral to get it to the planning board. I would certainly hope for their July meeting, so that they can at least then start their clock as to whatever they have to do. And again, that's as of right now. If what I come across changes that, I'll let you know. But that would be the schedule I'd be looking at this point.
Without asking for any commitment from the planning board on that point, it is a project they're familiar with. They have most of these materials as you do now, and while I understand there's a risk that they won't be comfortable in July, I am comfortable with that process, and I want the board to be comfortable. So that timetable is fine. Get council's advice, and although I'll miss him on the 28th, I hope.
So let me just understand, to be on the July meeting, which is the 4th Tuesday of the month, to get on the agenda, Lynn can correct me if I'm wrong, but typically they would then have to submit whatever material is to be considered by the planning board a month in advance, correct? So wouldn't they have to submit it by the last week of June? Or could they just submit it in hopes that we refer it to them and then take it off if we don't?
Well, actually, I was going to suggest that.
Well, I'd like to hear from the staff.
So the submission deadline for the July planning board is June 22nd.
June 22nd, so that's next Thursday.
We can meet that. Again, with no, not asking for
I just want for Stuart on that stuff.
You might, but we will not. The problem with that is that I think that we need to still get a resolution passed from this end, and we're not going to meet again. We're going to on the 21st, and then we wouldn't have. There wouldn't be another legislature until the 28th. So, I mean, that's just a matter of scheduling. I mean, that's just how it works out.
Well, the 28th is actually a work session. We could always go into legislative session.
That's right. Why it's off that. So, that's exactly right. You can do that for just for that purpose of the resolution if you want to do that. Then the question to Lynn and the planning board is would they be able to, because these materials are, with the planning department, not the planning board, could it get onto a July calendar? I'd leave that more up to Lynn because that's more a scheduling matter than anything else.
Lynn, can you speak to that? About putting something on the agenda if the board hasn't actually requested the referral?
So
refer it to the planning board?
Oh, I apologize, I misunderstood. It would not go to the planning board until there's a formal referral from the.
I understand it wouldn't go to the planning board. I think the question is, please, Jim. I think the question is, if the planning board needs to have something, have the material by the 22nd to put on their agenda. If the board does not vote on the 21st to refer it to the planning board, but we are getting advice of counsel in the meantime, and we may vote the following week, would it be appropriate or inappropriate for the planning board to gather the material in case the board does move forward with making the referral? And then if the board doesn't move forward with making the referral, taking it off the agenda? Lynn?
We can accept the material and hold on to it. The agenda gets published about 10 days before the meeting in the newspaper, so there's some time between the time we take in the application and the agenda actually gets written and published. So there's space where in that 2-week time, if the board doesn't take action and actually formally refer it to the planning board, we can hold the documents and not refer it.
Where's the mailing? When do you do the mailing?
For
this
November?
notice, correct? Because there's a
It
notice.
goes out 2 weeks before.
So 2 weeks before, so it's the 10 days before.
Okay, so I think we have the answers to all of our questions. It sounds like we're gonna have advice of council next week, and you have your material ready to go if Lynn says you need to resubmit it by such and such a date with these possible scenarios.
Thank you very much.
All right, well, we've all learned a lot about planning procedure again tonight. Thank you very much. Good. Okay, we need a motion to adjourn to work session for the purpose of discussing matters of personnel relating to executive session. Thank you. Executive session for purposes of personnel matters related to particular persons. All in favor? Aye. Thank you very much for joining us for this evening's work session and special session. We look forward to seeing you next week at the Birdsall-Fagan Police Court facility for our legislative meeting. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.